What my husband's friend said that night changed everything. You won't believe it. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. My name is Linda, and I turned 58 last fall. I've lived a fairly quiet life in a small Pennsylvania town with my husband, Gary. We've been married for 33 years. That's a long time to share the same kitchen, the same bed, the same stories over and over. Not that I didn't love Gary. I did. I still do. But somewhere along the way, our marriage became more about routine than romance. It was a cool April evening, the kind where the scent of blooming lilacs mixes with the distant smell of a neighbor's grill. Gary had invited his oldest friend, Mark, over for dinner. They'd been inseparable since college, football games, fishing trips, poker nights. Mark was a familiar face at our table. Widowed young, never remarried, and often joking that he preferred bourbon over emotional entanglements. That night felt no different, at first. I'd made meatloaf, Gary's favorite, with roasted potatoes and green beans from the little garden I tend behind our house. The dining room was warm, filled with the clinking of silverware, laughter echoing off the old walls, and the occasional hum of jazz coming from the Bluetooth speaker Gary insisted on using even though it always cut in and out. We talked about mundane things, gas prices, weather patterns, a silly argument Gary had with a mechanic. But I noticed Mark kept glancing my way when Gary wasn't looking. Not in a flirtatious way, more thoughtful, like he wanted to say something and didn't quite know how. After dinner, Gary poured them both some whiskey and settled into the recliner, flipping on a baseball game. I was about to clear the dishes when Mark suddenly stood and offered to help. That alone was strange. In 30 years of knowing him, Mark had never once offered to wash a plate. In the kitchen, it was just the two of us. The window above the sink was cracked open, and I could hear crickets outside, a soft spring breeze drifting in. I handed him a towel. He dried a plate, and then another, then paused, still holding the towel in his hands like it had become something sacred. "Linda," he said, his voice lower than usual, almost cautious. "Can I ask you something?" I glanced at him, eyebrows raised, unsure where this was going. "Sure." He hesitated. "Are you happy?" I blinked, stunned. No small talk, no build-up, just that question, raw and honest. I laughed softly, unsure how else to react. "That's a loaded question, Mark." He set the towel down on the counter. "I know. I shouldn't have asked. It's just..." He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I've known you and Gary forever. And tonight, watching you two, I don't know, you look like you were somewhere else." That hit harder than I expected, because he was right. I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "Marriage isn't a fairy tale, Mark. You know that." He nodded slowly. "Sure, but it should still feel alive." The air felt heavier suddenly, not tense exactly, but thick with something unspoken. I noticed then how his eyes softened when they met mine. He wasn't being judgmental. He was being kind, curious, maybe even concerned. "You've always been good at seeing people," I admitted, "even when they don't want to be seen." He smiled, the corners of his mouth tugging upward just enough. "And you've always been good at hiding. But tonight..." I sighed. "I don't know, Mark. Sometimes I feel like I disappeared somewhere along the way. Like I used to be this vibrant, passionate woman, and now I'm just someone's wife." Mark stepped closer, slowly, like he didn't want to startle me. "You're not just anything, Linda." The way he said my name made me feel something I hadn't in a long time. Not desired exactly. Something deeper. Seen. We stood there, inches apart, the clinking of ice cubes in Gary's glass faintly audible from the other room. I wasn't sure what I expected to happen. Maybe nothing. Maybe just words. But then Mark whispered something I wasn't prepared for. You deserve more than this. Those 5 words cracked something open inside me. I didn't respond, didn't even know how to. Mark gave a gentle nod, then picked up another plate, towel in hand, as if he hadn't just shifted the ground beneath my feet. That night, long after Mark left and Gary snored softly in the bedroom, I sat alone on the porch swing with a blanket over my knees and my thoughts swirling like the wind. What did Mark mean by more? More attention? More connection? More of the woman I used to be? And why did it matter so much that he saw it, when Gary never did? I didn't sleep much that night. Something had changed, even if nothing happened. And I knew, deep in my chest, that things would never be the same again. The next morning, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The sun poured through the lace curtains in the kitchen, casting soft golden light across the tile floor. Gary sat at the table sipping his coffee, scrolling through news on his tablet. I made his toast like always, 2 slices with a smear of raspberry jam, no butter. He grunted a thank you without looking up. I sat across from him, my own cup of coffee untouched, going cold in my hands. Mark's words echoed in my mind like a haunting melody. You deserve more than this. It would have been easy to brush it off, chalk it up to a late-night conversation fueled by bourbon and nostalgia. But I knew it wasn't that. There was something behind his voice. Truth, maybe. Or something closer to pain. I kept seeing the look in his eyes. Not lust. Not pity. Something in between, like he saw my emptiness and wanted to fill it with something real. Gary finally looked up. You're quiet this morning. I forced a smile. Just tired. He nodded and went back to reading. I wanted to ask him so many things. Do you still see me? Do you even remember who I am beyond your wife, the woman who keeps your world running quietly in the background? But I didn't. I sipped my cold coffee and let the moment pass, like so many others. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the garden. I always found peace there, my hands in the soil, the sun on my back, the simple rhythm of pruning, watering, tending. But even that felt different now. Like I was pretending. Like I was trying to feel whole by doing the things that once made me feel alive. I was kneeling beside the roses when I heard a car pull up. I looked up and froze. It was Mark. He got out, holding a brown paper bag. Brought you something, he called out with a sheepish smile. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees. Mark, what are you doing here? He held up the bag. Lemon scones, from that bakery on Elm you love. I blinked. I haven't mentioned those in years. You didn't have to. He smiled again, softer this time. You used to light up every time you talked about them. We sat on the back porch, scones on a chipped plate between us. He poured 2 glasses of lemonade from the pitcher I'd made that morning. We didn't say much at first. Just sat in the breeze, listening to the wind rustle the trees. Finally, I broke the silence. Why did you say that to me last night? He looked down at his hands. Because it's the truth, and I've kept quiet for too long. I turned to him, searching his face. What truth? He exhaled slowly. That I've watched you fade for years. That you used to be this vibrant woman, always laughing, always dreaming. And now, you look like someone waiting. For something. For anything. His voice caught at the end, and that caught me off guard. I whispered, "And what do you think I'm waiting for?" He looked right into my eyes then. Permission. I swallowed hard. Permission for what? To want more. The air around us tightened, like the world was holding its breath. I felt my throat tighten. You think I'm selfish for feeling that way? No, he said gently. I think you're human. We sat in silence, the lemonade untouched. Then, carefully, he said, I've loved you, Linda. Quietly, respectfully, for a long time. Not in a way that would ever threaten Gary or what you two have, but in a way that sees you, all of you. Tears stung my eyes before I could stop them. Not because of what he said, but because I believed him. Because I felt it. Not just in his words, but in how he looked at me. Like I mattered. Like I hadn't disappeared. I stood, heart pounding, emotions crashing like waves. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to say anything, he replied. I just needed you to know. You deserve to be seen, Linda, even if it's only once. He stood too, slowly, leaving the bag of scones behind. And then he left. I stood there, alone again, the taste of lemon still on my tongue, and something aching deep inside me, like a door had opened, and I didn't know whether to walk through or close it forever. That night I sat beside Gary on the couch. He scrolled through the channels, searching for something to watch. I stared at the side of his face, wondering how two people could share a life and yet feel so far apart. What? He said, sensing my eyes on him. Nothing, I replied, voice quiet. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. And it was just beginning. The days that followed felt different, like I was walking through fog, aware of every step, every glance, every silence that filled the space between Gary and me. The routine remained the same. Breakfast at 7, Gary reading the newspaper, me tending to the garden, dinner by 6, the television always on, though neither of us really watched it. But I had changed. Mark's words had done something to me. Not just his confession, but the way he saw me, like I was more than a background character in someone else's story. Like I was a whole person, still capable of feeling, wanting, becoming. It made me wonder, when had I stopped wanting anything for myself? One morning, I found myself driving to the lake on a whim. It was the place Gary and I used to visit in our early years, before the kids, before the mortgage, before life turned into a long checklist. I parked under a sycamore tree and walked to the water's edge. It shimmered in the morning sun, calm and still, just like I remembered. I stood there for a long time, arms crossed, wind tugging at my hair. I didn't know what I was waiting for. A sign? A feeling? Some kind of answer. And then I heard footsteps. I turned. Mark. He looked surprised to see me, but not entirely. I used to come here with Gary, I said before he could speak. I know, he replied softly. He told me once, said you always looked peaceful here. I smiled faintly. I don't know if I've felt peaceful in a long time. We sat on the bench together, the one with the peeling paint and initials carved into the wood. A quiet breeze rustled the leaves above us. I'm sorry, I said suddenly. Mark looked at me confused. For what? For not knowing how to feel. For being afraid to feel it. He reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. You don't owe me anything, he said gently. But you do owe yourself the truth. The truth. I'd been avoiding it for so long I wasn't even sure what it was anymore. I don't want to hurt Gary, I whispered. I know, Mark said, and I would never ask you to. But I also can't keep pretending I'm not disappearing. There it was. The truth. We sat in silence, our hands still linked. And then he said something that I would carry with me forever. Love isn't just about history. It's about presence. About being seen and seeing someone fully, even in the quiet. I turned to look at him, really look. His eyes were steady, kind. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just there, offering a kind of connection I hadn't felt in years. I leaned against his shoulder, not in a romantic way, at least not yet, but in a way that felt safe, real, like I could exhale. When I returned home that afternoon, Gary didn't ask where I'd been. He was in the garage, working on something I couldn't care less about. The old Linda would have brought him lemonade, asked questions, played the part. But this new version of me, this version Mark helped wake up, she went inside and sat down with a pen and paper. I began writing, pages and pages, not to Gary, not to Mark, to myself, about who I used to be, who I wanted to become, what I was willing to let go of, and what I needed to find again. For the first time in years, I felt alive, not because of Mark, but because I allowed myself to feel something again. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't have a plan. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't go back to sleepwalking through my life. The following week, I asked Gary if we could talk. We sat in the kitchen, where so many of our years had unfolded, me pouring coffee and reading the paper, the scent of pancakes and morning silence between us. But this time, there were no distractions, just us. I took a breath. "Are you happy, Gary?" He looked up slowly, confused. "What kind of question is that?" "A real one." He rubbed his jaw. "I mean, yeah, I guess. We've got a good life. Roof over our heads. Kids are doing fine. Bills are paid. What more is there?" I nodded. That's what I thought too. For a long time. But I think we stopped seeing each other. He leaned back. "You saying you're not happy?" "I'm saying I feel like I've vanished. Like I'm here physically, but something inside me has been missing for a long time." He didn't say anything at first. Then, quietly, "Is this about Mark?" I met his eyes. "No, it's about me." Mark just happened to notice what neither of us wanted to admit. Gary exhaled, ran his hand through his thin hair. "So what now?" "I don't know. But I can't go on pretending everything's fine. I need something more than routine. I need to feel alive again." He didn't argue, and that, in a way, hurt more than if he had. Because it confirmed what I already knew. We'd both been drifting, too tired or too numb to paddle back to each other. "I never wanted to hurt you," I said. "I know," he replied. "I just thought this was how things go. You settle in. You grow old together. Growing old together doesn't mean we have to stop growing at all." The next few days passed like moving through molasses, slow, heavy, uncertain. Then, on a cloudy Thursday, I called Mark. "I've decided something," I said. He waited. "I'm not leaving Gary, but I am finding myself again. Whether that means going back to school, traveling, joining a writing group, I don't know yet. But I'm done living half a life." There was a pause. "I'm proud of you," Mark said. "Really." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I also need to know where we stand," I added. Mark was quiet. I'll always care about you. But more than that, I want you to be whole, with or without me. Those words, gentle, respectful, true, landed in my heart like a bomb. Thank you, I whispered. That spring, I enrolled in a painting class at the community center. I started waking early just to walk by the lake before breakfast. I journaled every morning, rediscovering the voice I'd buried under decades of dishes and dinners. Gary and I began talking more, real conversations. It wasn't always easy. Some days we argued, some days we sat in silence. But we were trying. That mattered. And Mark, he remained in my life. As a friend, a quiet witness to my reawakening. Our relationship shifted, less charged, more grounded. He still brought me lemon scones sometimes. Still saw me without trying to fix me. Sometimes love isn't about romance. Sometimes it's about reflection. Someone holding up a mirror when you've forgotten what you look like. Now, as I sit on the porch swing, the same one where I once wondered what Mark meant by more, I know the answer. More is claiming your voice. More is daring to feel again. More is living, not just surviving. And it's never too late. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories.